I had been working on a number of poems that I called The Inheritance of Women that were really around like the finding letters, my grandmother and aunt with dementia, all those sort of memories. But when you sort of asked what might work, I started thinking about how would I put more of a collection together. So I started grabbing some others and thinking about how I could sort of theme it out. Yeah. But they were all written, and I just tried to put them together. So,
kudos. I thought that as a performer, it flowed so wonderfully for me, and it really told a story, and that is so interesting and makes it even easier to think about. Okay, so how do we stage this? How do we make scenes off of this? It flowed together so great. So we're so grateful. Thank you for participating in this science experiment I've got going. I appreciate you so much. Do we have any questions from the audience? I see a hand. Yes.
Over what period of time did you actually write all these individually? Because it seems like there are certain time frames for certain sections. So I wonder what kind of, I'm not trying to talk your output here, but you understand what I'm saying, okay?
The actual writing of these poems probably was in the last 2 years, but the subjects of the poems go back my entire lifetime. So, thank you. There's a question back there. Yeah, house lights would be good, because I can't see anyone. So I have, thanks to Julie Gamick, who is here, I'm a member, well look here all of you are, you appeared, yes. Where is Julie? Julie's back there. I'm a member of the Iowa Writers Collaborative, and I have a Substack column called Dispatches from the Heartland, where I post poems once a week, and then I have had poems published in a number of magazines and journals. So some of them are on that Substack site, and some of them are in other places. So, thank you. Mm-hmm.
How does your process work? Do you think of the idea and start writing it, or does it just kind of organically come to you? How long does it take to go back and revisit it?
I like the soundtrack over there. Yeah, exactly. Well, I think probably like a lot of writers, different things at different times. So I may get an image or an idea, and I'll jot something down, and sometimes a whole poem will just kind of pour out, but then I've learned a lot about revision. You have to go back over and over. Sometimes there will just be something that I'm thinking about. So you heard a few poems about an aunt. She was in a memory care facility, and I wrote a lot just trying to process that. I had a friend who was dying over the last year, and I wrote constantly, and I think it was just my way of trying to make sense of things. It was very healing to write for me. So it's a great question, and thank you. You were amazing.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mary Jane Cobb. SNAP is number one, right? Well, just to be clear, this particular collection was very much focused on women. My overall writing focuses a lot on nature. I know, a lot on death too, but so some of this was very heavy poetry, and I'm very grateful for you to listen to it. That middle part had a lot of heavy poems, but these are realities. These are the things that have been happening, the stories that haven't been told. Some of them happened to me, some of them happened to other women that I wrote about, and I think my feeling is we have to keep working all the time to address the stories and secrets and the bad things that are happening to women, but not just women, to anyone who's from an underrepresented group or whose voice is not heard. We just can't stop. And I think telling stories, whether it's through poems or plays or journalism, is a part of that. Thank you. Or politics, Mary Jane Cobb, or teaching, Mary Jane Cobb.
So what you saw were people interpreting your poems as stories. Were there insights in the way that those people interpreted your poems that gave you new insight into your own creativity?
Absolutely, and it was phenomenal, I have to tell you. I mean, when you write, you know, Christine Riccelli has said to me, she's out here, is you read and you forget what you've saying and you lose any objectivity. And hearing someone else, I think, breathed entirely new life into these words. But I heard them emphasize things sometimes differently than I might have, and that actually was very powerful, how someone heard that and how they said it. So that was one of the things we talked about. It's really interesting when Davida read the farm worker poem that I wrote for Proteus. Her interpretation of it was frankly much stronger than how I would have read it. And I mean, that's the power of acting as well, and people with beautiful voices. But thank you. It's a wonderful question. Mm-hmm. Mary?
There was one poem in that middle section that was so heavy that no one clapped, and I wondered what your reaction was.
I guess I would turn that back on the audience.
Yeah, I personally thought it was the perfect reaction. Because, I mean, if that's what the words did to the audience, then that's what the words did to the audience. You know? Felt very organic to me.
I think it was anger that was over the top. If nobody was in the class while they were back. That's how I see it.
That's the beauty of performance, is allowing the audience to feel what you feel. Absolutely. I saw him.
Bob?
Catharsis implies closure, but scar tissue, lots of times never gets smooth, if you know. Can you talk a little bit about what makes things smooth after the scar tissue starts to fade?
I think so. No, it's a really, really interesting question about how we process pain. I mean, how I process pain, obviously, but how we process pain and how we heal. And writing and reading words, I think, evoke emotions in us and sometimes free us to feel things. And then over time, maybe that healing process happens. Sometimes pain never goes away, but pain lessens and you're able to look at it differently and observe it and then choose how you react to it versus reacting to it. Reka?
Susanna, that was beautiful, first of all. I love your poetry, and that was just such a wonderful reading. You feel very proud. One question I have for you is, before Julie asked you to write your poems for an audience, did you write just for yourself, or did you write never expecting anyone else to read them?
I'm still writing, never expecting anyone to read them. No, I wrote poetry all my life for myself. Again, I think it's probably just a creative process that I enjoyed and that I found very helpful. And I was stunned that people read it, and it's been very gratifying to know that sometimes it resonates with people. So I'm still writing, but I don't ever think, oh, well, what would Reka like? Unless I write you a birthday poem or something like that. And I think that that's been a gift Julie has also given, is to say, here's a platform, put it out there, see what happens. And this, too, is a great experiment. I wasn't sure what they were going to do, and I just inherently trusted Davida, and I said, let's see. Let's see. This is the creative process.
But is there any sort of self-censorship that starts to happen when you know it's going to go out and be read by audiences?
I didn't put any of these poems on Substack. I didn't put any of the more violence against women poems on Substack. I have submitted those to journals, and so I know people out there are reading them, but in a local environment, I think there's been a certain amount of holding back, and I mean, I think that just not sure how people would respond or what message I'm sending, but I think the things you heard are important stories I feel comfortable talking about and writing about. As Mary Jane said, if we don't talk about them, how do we do anything about them? If it's a way to start healing or action, then I feel very comfortable doing that. Christine?
So, as the leader of BTC, which everybody here knows, and I personally know how much you've worked, how long you've worked, how many hours you've worked. So, two questions. One is, okay, when do you write? I know that you work like kind of 24/7, and also, like you said, what you just said, do you ever self-censor because of your role as the president of Business Publications and because of you're a community leader?
So when do I work? I write at night and I write on the weekends. And as I've told Connie, every now and then in a boring meeting I might get a line or two, but no, it's mostly, at 10 o'clock at night and a lot on the weekends. So it's a pleasure to write. It does not feel like I have to fit it in. I really welcome writing time. But in terms of, do I feel a need to censor myself? I think, yes, absolutely. From a professional standpoint, there are things that are appropriate for me to share, and there are things that are not appropriate for me to share. But I think people who knew me in my role running Planned Parenthood, I was a lot more vocal about more political things and more, I think, raw topics of women. I try to be more tempered. I feel like in some ways expressing myself through poetry is a more appropriate way than I'm not going to write an op-ed about some things. That would be a conflict of interest. So, but Connie hasn't slapped my hand on my poetry yet, and I think if I went over the line, I would know it, and we would talk about that. Chuck.
Suzanne, I'm still confused. So did you study poetry at any point in your life? Like academically or anything?
No, I was an art, religion, anthropology, and art history major. And then I have an MBA. So maybe organizational behavior was, in fact, a poetry class. No, I have always been interested in poetry, and my aunt, who you heard about a little bit, was a women's literature and women's studies professor, and she gave us so much poetry. So we always read poetry. I loved it. And I'd love to go back and take some poetry classes now. But I'm not formally trained.
But really, I mean, has this just been in the last couple of years that you've really gotten public with this?
It's in the last couple of years that I submitted things for publication. Yeah. When I was in my 20s, I was involved in the poetry scene in Dallas, and I did poetry slams and read. So my old friends know me as an artist and poet, but then I just sort of put that in a box for a long time in terms of sharing it. People are nodding. We know. I got busy. Open the box. Open the box. Yes, exactly. Hi, how are you? Abin, I didn't see you there.
I would like to know, when did you realize and accept that you are a writer, a poet? Because I find that to be a moment. And what was that like for you?
I realized I was a...
About 5 years old.
I've always thought of myself as a writer and an artist, whether I was doing that work or not. I don't think I really named myself a poet until I started getting poems published, which is BS, honestly. You can be whoever you are, but you like, when did you find that? When you got published, or were you an author way before in your soul? Way before. Mm-hmm.
That is an artist then.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But that's a good question. I think that's always been my inner identity as an artist and a writer. Mm-hmm. So, you're smiling out there. Okay.
I'm just thinking about all the people who need to hear, especially that middle part, especially at Interstate Capitol. But I'm curious, I've heard a lot of stories about aunts. And what do you think she would think of tonight?
My aunt was a woman of few words, right? My aunt would not come up and hug me and say, I love you, right? She would just look at me, go outside, have a cigarette, and it would all be good. No, I think she would be very proud. She encouraged creation and creativity and writing and everyone, and was a huge theater patron. So, thank you. What do you think? Would she be happy?
She would say love.
Love Lois. Yeah.
I just had a thought when I was listening to your poetry, particularly about your aunt, of the difference of how we deal with pain today compared to maybe your aunt's generation. I'm in my 70s now, but my father, I thought about this before, my grandparents, the pain was sort of, yeah, we knew this was going to happen. I think more today, we look at painful things as something that's sort of an aberration that shouldn't happen to me. Why does it happen to me? And whereas in the past, it was like, well, yeah, of course, this is life. And when we have some really painful things, for some reason, when we were reading the poems, particularly about your aunt, that kind of came to me. With that difference of how, which I obviously know your aunt, and how she may have dealt with it, as opposed to maybe how you deal with it, or somebody in the younger generation.
It's a great question. This is the whole, I think, query about, it's hard to know their stories. It's hard to know, a lot of these were about my grandmother or my great-grandmother, and, did they sit around and talk about their mental health issues, or did they just go get in the garden and try to stay alive, right? So our baseline expectations of joy and pain and suffering may have changed over time, that people were more grateful, for their life, or they expected suffering, whereas today, no, everyone needs to make me happy all the time, seems to be an expectation. But we don't necessarily know that, and I think especially in writing about underrepresented groups. Did women talk and write openly about their pain? Did they talk about miscarriages? Did they talk about domestic violence? Did they talk about mental health? Did they talk about being married to an alcoholic when they were out on a farm in the middle of nowhere and there was nothing they can do about it, right? they didn't necessarily write about it. And the same for if you were a gay man on a farm in 1920, were you writing about your pain, or were you stuffing it in other ways? Were you coping the best that you could? But I think that's a brilliant question of what are those expectations of what is life and suffering and not.
Or maybe have like Spanish-speaking immigrant grandparents
On the llano.
answered everything which they said, that is what would be. I'm wondering if the theater company here could envision after you've done this performance and read this wonderful poetry, if you could envision kind of doing some kind of theatrical presentation of what you've just done.
Yeah, oh, yeah. You want to know what it is? I just see.
Is that a firm yes?
Yeah. As I read in general, as I hear, you picture what you read, you see it, you cast it, maybe the person at the grocery store is playing this or whatever. So that's just how my brain works anyway. But I see maybe the piece being acted out as it's being read. I see maybe just general movements. I see maybe something playing on a screen I see a combination. There's just a lot of things we can do. There's a lot of fun things we can do. Yeah.
I had told Rob Sunderman in December that I had a few poems where I loved the idea of multimedia backdrops, like with the letters and the farmhouses, like trying to bring imagery alive, though I had no idea what that would look like. And the ensemble part where you did She Was the Only One, that's another piece that I've thought could be a spark for maybe not these poems, but just a whole women's empowerment, like telling the story of all these only women, right? The first woman to do this, the one who was alone, and do some arc with it that way. So I have a lot of different ideas of things, but the theater part is so fascinating to me.
Me too. I like it. I'm into it. Yeah, why shouldn't we elevate each other? We're all artists. We have different skill sets, so we have different tools. I don't have her tools. I was telling somebody in the audience, I got challenged to a little, I'm going to start a piece, and then you take it over. And I stressed for 4 straight hours trying to get about 6 lines out. So that's not my gift, and that is fine. That is okay. But why can't we, like I said, really, it's just kind of a world dominance thing with me. Theater can show everyone how it's done. And how do we do that? I say, hey, friend, let me help you. And you say, yes, friend, I would like that. That's what we're doing.